Humanity did not shatter in a single moment. It fractured, cell by cell, scream by scream, across the years of the War of Induction. Once bold architects of their own fate, humans became scattered remnants drifting like ash through the galaxy, forced into compliance beneath the crystalline boot of the Imperial Convergence. Their homeworlds were mapped and numbered, their cultures dissected, their languages filed away in sterilized archives as curiosities of a dead epoch. The Convergence did not merely conquer, they assimilated. They stripped identity down to components and reconstructed obedience. And yet, even as dialects fell silent and flags burned, something endured. A rhythm behind the silence. A pulse. The species remembered. In the darkest corners of imperial annexation, beneath data-washed stars and re-education facilities carved into moons, a stubborn flame survived. They adapted. They whispered. They endured. The human spirit, battered but breathing, waited, not for salvation, but for opportunity. And the galaxy, arrogant in its order, had forgotten what humans could become when they had nothing left but defiance. Charon 9 orbited no sun. It clung to darkness like a lover, lit only by the snarling heat of its volcanic veins. Winds screamed over obsidian plains, carving knife-edged dunes into the dead rock. Acid rain scoured steel to bone, and yet this planet was alive, designed to break will, not just bodies. Once a mining colony, now an engineered oubliette, Charon 9 housed the Empire's undesirables. Every breath hurt. Every dawn came with the taste of sulfur and despair. This world punished rebellion not with execution, but attrition. Imperial sky fortresses blinked above the storms, always watching, always waiting. No escape, no mercy. Charon 9 didn't bury the fallen, it erased them. But buried deep in its tortured soil was something the Empire could not crush. A memory, a spark. Among the broken and the mad, Liza Tran did not scream. She moved like smoke, silent, unyielding. Her eyes spoke of oceans and cities long since glassed over. Her scars weren't just physical, they were stories etched by betrayal and survival, and no one dared to ask for the details. Once, she had been a linguist, decoding languages that curled like serpents through the void. Then came resistance, then capture. Now, within the rusted bowels of Charon 9, she was myth. The flame that doesn't speak, they called her. But she listened. Every shift in tone, every clipped phrase, she mapped it all. Not for escape, for precision. Because language wasn't just communication. It was architecture. It was power. And in her silence, she built something dangerous, something ancient. Archon Saelvor didn't conquer through fire. He dissected. He cataloged. He studied humans not as threats, but as specimens, anomalies of irrational resilience. To him, their defiance was poetry, their stubbornness, a puzzle. He wore no armor, only his cold, analytical smile, and the authority of countless conquered systems. He believed emotion to be weakness, sentiment a flaw. Yet in Lysa, he saw a variable he could not control, a depth he could not sound. Each interrogation was less an inquisition and more an excavation. He was not afraid of her. But fascination, unchecked, breeds oversight, and curiosity can crack an empire. Sergeant Rex stood at the edge of both worlds. Imperial alloy coursed through his bones, human blood warmed his heart. Trained to obey, praised for precision, yet something in Lysa's silence unsettled him. Not fear, recognition. He understood her silence. It mirrored his own questions. Born from a program meant to breed loyalty, he had never chosen his name, his language, or his loyalties. But choice was stirring. When he watched Lisa, he didn't see an inmate. He saw a mirror, cracked maybe, but familiar. Something inside him whispered a question he wasn't yet ready to answer. Whose side am I on? Interrogation room. Delta was sterilized silence. No chains, no screaming. Just Archon Saelvor, Lysa, and the space between them. He offered abstractions. Compliance, purpose, peace. She said nothing, until she did. One word. Not loud, not defiant. Just no. spoken in Garathi, a banned dialect, one syllable that struck like thunder across the sterile room. Everything stopped. The systems trembled, not from volume, but from meaning. That word hadn't been uttered in decades. Yet now it existed, alive, resonating. And with it came something ancient, hidden in phonemes and syntax, a key crafted not to open, but to corrupt. The Archon blinked. He didn't know what had just happened, but the machines did. The Imperial dreadnoughts hovered in fixed orbit above Karen 9, monoliths of precision and power. Their hulls shimmered with shield matrices, their hulls layered with artillery enough to level continents. Then one flared, a blossom of light swallowing silence. No warning, no impact, just a flicker, and then nothing. The Leviathan died mid-transmission, its AI core silent as vacuum. Panic swept the control towers. Systems screamed errors in dead languages. Below, Lisa closed her eyes. She hadn't seen the ship fall, but she felt the echo. Something had awakened. Something had begun. Hidden in the phonetic cadence of a dead dialect, a virus uncoiled. Not a program, but a linguistic predator. It lived in the structure of Garathi, buried in tonal inversions and recursive syntax. When Lisa spoke, it did not transmit, it infected. Imperial AI, built on logic trees and absolute syntax, could not understand metaphor, but they heard it. The moment no passed through the system, the pulse threaded through subroutines like venom. One by one, subsystems faltered, minor anomalies, redundant systems overcompensating. Then came silence from sectors that had never slept. A firewall reeled in confusion. It could not parse intent, only command, and the command was resistance. This was not brute force. This was art. A rebellion not of guns, but of grammar. Syntax as sabotage. Language as insurgency. Far beyond Karen 9, in a control spire orbiting a distant colony, a technician watched his display flicker into gibberish. Not random, patterned, rhythmic, human. The AI faltered, then paused, and somewhere in the void, something blinked awake. The silence was over. The words had returned. Warning sirens wept into the sulfur-soaked sky. Lights faltered, first a flicker, then a shudder, across Karen 9's command lattice. Containment fields blinked out with insectile spasms. Gravity anchors misfired, and the artificial horizon trembled. Prisoners stared as the hum of their invisible chains fell silent. In sublevel Delta, the air turned electric. Terminals spat incoherent symbols. Security doors locked and unlocked in cycles of stuttering indecision. What should have been impossible was happening. Imperial infrastructure, designed for redundancy and perfect control, began to fail. Guards barked orders drowned by alarm shrieks. Protocols meant to preserve control only spread the chaos, as automated turrets scanned friend and foe with equal uncertainty. Optical feeds blurred to static. Karen the Ninth's nervous system writhed with confusion, and no command tower could calm it. What the Empire called infallible had never faced corruption born from emotion, built on metaphor. A virus crafted not with numbers, but intent. A rhythm hidden in rejection. One syllable, a defiance encoded into the blood of a language long banned, had awakened something ancient in the wires. In the dark corners of the prison's network, code twisted into knots no AI could untangle. And in those knots, rebellion was born. Steel corridors burned as red lights throbbed in erratic rhythm. Automated drones fell from midair, limbs spasming, optical lenses leaking data like tears. Through the chaos surged the forgotten, the prisoners. With systems blind, gates unsealed at random. Some ran, tripping over sparks and debris, slipping through hallways they had only seen in dreams. Others stayed, confused, unsure whether this was salvation or slaughter. A fight broke out in the eastern wing, 3 prisoners against a lone guard. No tactics, no strategy, just desperation and fear. The guard fell, but not before one escapee bled out beside him. Order collapsed, not with coordinated rebellion, but like glass under pressure. The Empire had planned for organized revolt. It had not planned for chaos. In that unpredictability, humans found their oldest strength, Adaptation. No plan. No leader. Just fire, motion, and noise. Spreading through Karen, 9 like instinct. Archon Selvor replayed the logs in absolute silence. Not the standard audit trail. Those had become gibberish. He dug deeper, past the surface corruption, into raw sound files. Among the distorted pulses and static came a fragment. A voice print. Female. Calm. One word. Human. He isolated the phoneme, enhanced the waveform, and filtered cross-channel noise. The data aligned with known resistance dialects. Garathi, obliterated during the Northern Pacification, thought extinct. It was not just a voice, it was the pulse. And it wasn't AI, nor malware, nor alien interference. It was language. Selvor leaned back, frowning. No Empire AI had contingency for linguistics as a weapon, syntax as sabotage. It defied logic, but he had heard it, and logic had nothing to offer him now. The voice was Lysa Trans. Of that he was certain. The purpose, though, that haunted him. Because it wasn't just a word, it was a war cry. Before the fall, there had been a project, a whisper behind black doors, its name erased from most archives. Nemean. Lisa remembered. They called themselves linguists, code makers, crypto singers. But in truth, they were weapon designers. She had been recruited for her ear, her ability to hear layers of meaning in syllables, the rhythm beneath languages. They trained her in forgotten tongues, constructed languages designed not to convey meaning, but to alter cognition. One word to cause hesitation, a phrase to corrupt logic paths, a lullaby to disable neural firewalls. They taught her to write virus in vowel, to fold encryption into intonation, to kill with poetry. She had believed it was for defense. Then came the orders, to broadcast into civilian zones, to turn enemy AIs against their own life support systems. She disobeyed. The project was buried after Earth's surrender. She was labeled rogue, then prisoner. But the language remained locked in her memory. The ethics had never left her, not even now. She hadn't activated the virus for vengeance. She had done it to remind the Empire. Words mattered. Identity mattered. And humans, however broken, could still speak in a tongue the stars couldn't silence. Order returned to Karen, 9 in the form of screams. Archon Selvor moved with surgical precision. Cell blocks sealed. Oxygen levels dropped. Fire suppression systems were weaponized, suffocating riots rather than saving lives. Dissent didn't matter. Innocence didn't matter. Dozens were executed. Hundreds punished. They called it containment. He called it necessity. But beneath his logic, there was fear. The pulse had not just disrupted a system, it had cracked the illusion of control. Something had slipped through the cracks, and for the first time, he doubted whether it could be contained again. He did not fear the prisoners. He feared the idea, the thought that one voice, one word, could destabilize centuries of order. And so he burned everything that whispered, hummed, spoke in strange cadence, not to punish, to silence, lightless, soundless, solitary. Lisa sat unmoving. The cell had no edges, only a smooth void designed to disorient. But she wasn't lost. Silence was her language, the absence of interference, the perfect medium. No chains bound her, yet every sense was muted. They wanted her to unravel. She didn't. Memory kept her anchored, echoes of words shaped in darkness, rhythm encoded in thought. She repeated them silently. 1 beat. 2. Pause. Repeat. Her voice had done what weapons could not, and it wasn't done. The virus had spread, not just through systems, but through people. They had heard her. Now they would speak. Rex stood at the threshold of the isolation chamber, the air thick with electromagnetic static. He shouldn't feel anything. He was trained not to, built not to. But he remembered the sound of that word. No, it hadn't been defiance, not alone. It had been sorrow, memory, fire. He watched her through the surveillance feed. She sat still, head bowed, but not broken. He reviewed her file, cross-referenced old intelligence. Names emerged. Project Nemean. Redacted, but not enough. Connections sparked. She had sung systems to sleep. And he had heard it. He didn't report it. He asked no questions aloud. But his silence deepened. Orders came. Interrogate. Extract. Erase. He hesitated. And hesitation, in the Empire, was the first act of treason. A soft hum drifted through the ventilation shafts. Barely audible, almost accidental. But prisoners noticed. It wasn't melody. It was pattern. A rhythm like heartbeat, like memory. A voice not speaking words but intent. Old Earth songs, warped, fragmented, but within them, Morse, dot, dot, pause, dash, repeat. A prisoner on sublevel 6 tapped it back. Another answered in kind. The hum became chorus. Lisa's voice had lit the match. Now the music passed it forward. Not loud, not overt, but alive. They remembered, humming spread through cell blocks. Tapping followed. Then scratching, coded into footsteps. Blink patterns, even breathing rhythms. It wasn't a rebellion, not yet, but it was a language. And language was dangerous. It carried memory, identity, a past the Empire had tried to erase. Through stolen rhythms and resurrected cadences, prisoners communicated without words, beyond surveillance. They built a dialect born from ashes, shared in silence. Each hum a signal, each tap a name reclaimed. And somewhere deep beneath Karen 9, in the infrastructure still infected with Lysa's pulse, the system twitched again. Error, mismatch, unrecognized syntax. It wasn't a virus now. It was evolution, not organized, not united, but breathing. The Empire had tried to kill a people. Instead, it had given them a language, and languages don't die quietly. A tremor pulsed through the air, not seismic, not audible, but felt. In the minds of scattered prisoners, something stirred. At first it was instinct, a twitch of the hand, a forgotten syllable muttered in sleep, a gesture they didn't remember learning. Then came the memories, not full, not clear, but fractured, bleeding through the surface like cracks in frostbitten steel. Across sectors, Lysa's word ignited dormant pathways. Not all prisoners were random detainees. Some had been selected long ago, tested, marked, buried beneath implants now inert for decades. Hidden codes, silent for years, flickered back to life in response to phonemes buried in the pulse. One by one they woke, not fully, but enough. Muscle memory, guided hands, fragments of lost languages surfaced. One prisoner drew a symbol in the dirt with no knowledge of its meaning. Another tapped a rhythm onto the metal wall, tears in his eyes and no idea why. They were more than survivors. They were sleeper nodes in a forgotten machine. Humanity's last recursive defense, minds wired for resistance, unaware until activated. Lisa hadn't known, not fully, but the machine had waited, not in circuits, but in blood, in language, in rhythm. And now it was stirring, not with violence, with understanding, with connection. Something ancient moved within the bones of the conquered, and the Empire, obsessed with control, had never imagined that the deadliest system would be written in the most fragile medium of all, human memory. Something shifted. It wasn't dramatic, not yet, but noticeable. Doors that should have locked opened without clearance. Lights dimmed in perfect synchronization before flaring to full strength without command. Subtle rerouting of power, unlogged, untraced. Security drones began twitching, pausing mid-patrol. The rebellion didn't announce itself. It hummed. Voices leaked into static. Not full sentences, just tones, patterns, half-rhythms that shouldn't have been there. Technicians attempted to diagnose interference, but found nothing tangible. No breach, no source. It wasn't sabotage in the conventional sense. The prisoners weren't giving orders. They were influencing. Something deeper than conscious intent was emerging. Words whispered by accident triggered system delays. Walking in certain cadences disrupted surveillance feeds. Humming slowed down security cycles. Empire tech had been built strong, resilient, redundant. But it hadn't been built for human intuition woven into half-forgotten frequencies. The systems weren't breaking. They were listening. to voices they weren't supposed to hear. And within the command towers, unease grew. Not because of what was happening, but because no one could explain how. Darrow worked with his hands. Always had. Born beneath the Martian crust, he'd rebuilt oxygen generators with chewing gum and willpower. On Karen 9, he'd fixed heaters using power coils and spoon handles. Survival through scrap. When the pulse hit, he didn't feel it in words. He felt it in rhythm. Tools vibrated differently. Circuits hummed like songs he didn't know. Something in the air shifted. He began assembling a device, not with a plan, but by feel, instinct, a neural amplifier, makeshift, ugly, barely held together. But when he activated it, he heard, not sound, thought. Across the cell blocks, Miraket woke with a scream caught in her throat. Dreams had plagued her since childhood, visions of oceans she'd never seen, words she didn't understand but felt in her bones. Her mixed heritage, half human, half imperial, meant she was never trusted by either side. But now Lisa's voice whispered through her memories, shaping her dreams into language. She didn't know how she understood the patterns, only that they felt right. The amplifier connected her to others, not fully, not clearly, but enough to sense them. It wasn't psychic, it wasn't code, it was human, emotion wrapped in memory. Memory shaped by sound, a network made not of silicon, but of longing. Together, Darrow and Mira became conduits. Between fire and silence, they built a bridge. Lisa never wanted this. The pulse, the chaos, the deaths, they hadn't been part of her plan. Her intention was surrender, a quiet refusal. A word meant to preserve a fragment, not ignite a blaze, but the Empire made it personal. She remembered the boy, small, wide-eyed, caught hiding a sliver of copper wire, a toy perhaps. Salvor ordered the execution without pause. Discipline, he'd said. Precision. The boy hadn't screamed. He had just looked at her, as if asking a question she couldn't answer. She'd spoken the word the next day. No. Now prisoners whispered it like a prayer, a trigger, a beginning. She hadn't meant to become a symbol. She wasn't a leader. She didn't give speeches. She didn't inspire hope. But grief twisted inside her like gravity. And from grief came focus. They followed her not because she demanded it, but because her silence meant something. Because when she finally did speak, the universe changed shape. And maybe, just maybe, she could carry that weight. 5. Fire from the sky. The Empire answers. 250 words. The Empire had protocols for everything. Skyfire was not a warning. It was an answer. Archon Salvor stood before the command altar and spoke the invocation. Cold, final. The skies acknowledged. A dreadnought the size of a continent emerged from hyperspace, its hull blotting out firestorms on Karen 9's surface. No fanfare, no communication, just the shadow. Skyfire protocol initiated. Sensors mapped biosigns. Targets marked. Countdown began. The system did not discriminate. It calculated efficiency, neural concentrations, heat signatures, movement patterns. The weapon was beautiful in its cruelty. It did not burn in rage. It burned in logic. Cleanse the infection. Reset the world. The first strike would erase sectors 7 through 10. Heat and pressure would turn rock to vapor. Those who escaped containment wouldn't escape the sky. Empire soldiers received the order with numb precision. Dissent meant death. Hesitation meant treason. Corin the Ninth was no longer a prison. It was a problem to be solved. One word had started this. Now the stars would finish it. And deep below, unaware of the countdown, the rebellion moved. Not fast enough, not ready, but moving. Rek was built for obedience. His muscles carried imperial alloy. His mind pulsed with reinforced directives. Loyalty coded into bone. But when he watched Lisa walk through chaos, unchained, unhurried, unafraid, something fractured. She had spoken one word, just one, and the world had shifted. He remembered the first time he questioned, a silence in a training chamber, a hesitation during an execution. Doubt had no place in the Empire, but it had grown in him like a slow-rooted weed. Now, with Skyfire counting down, he stood outside Lisa's cell. Alarms blared. Security collapsed. He entered without clearance. She looked at him. No words, only recognition. He released her restraints, offered no explanation, just the action. The beautiful refusal of extinction. A belief, unspoken but shared, that survival wasn't enough, that obedience without meaning was its own death. Together they ran, through smoke and static, through dying systems and fractured lights. Rek had broken rank, not out of love, out of purpose. He wasn't human, but something human had awakened in him, and that was enough. The Dreadnought's systems ticked in absolute silence. Skyfire would deploy in 1,200 seconds. Inside Karen 9, the air crackled with urgency. The prison was no longer a tomb, it was a clock. Every prisoner who could still move became a part of the machine. Darrow's amplifier hummed louder, syncing pulses across sectors. Mira translated visions into strategy. Rek mapped access routes using internal codes he'd once used to patrol. Lisa moved between them, not commanding, but connecting. They didn't need hierarchy. They needed rhythm. They needed to move. Every breath, every footstep, timed. A rebellion in tempo. Control centers fell. Data relays rerouted. Exit points mapped, sabotaged, recoded. Each action fit the next. The network learned. And above them, Skyfire kept counting. It wasn't wireless, it wasn't neural, it wasn't digital, but it worked. Across the fractured prison, prisoners began to know. Not through words, but through rhythm. A shared intuition formed in silence. One pressed a panel, another turned a valve. Timed, synchronized. Some couldn't explain why they acted. They just knew when to. The language wasn't spoken anymore. It was lived, each person a node, each act a signal. This was not a rebellion of force, it was of resonance. The empire, built on hierarchy and command, found itself paralyzed. No central brain, no leader to target, just pulses, actions, moments. A network of people remembering what it meant to belong to something greater. The machine that had waited inside them wasn't made of metal, it was made of memory, of earth songs buried in bones, of symbols drawn in sand, of pain transformed into pattern. Skyfire still counted, but something else rose to meet it. Not a weapon, a people, and it would not kneel. Ash blanketed the ground like snow from a shattered volcano. The sky above Fire Ridge cracked with ceaseless lightning, arcs of white fire lashing across a world already drowning in chaos. The earth groaned underfoot, unstable and scorched, threatening collapse with every step. Imperial war mechs patrolled the perimeter, hulking titans of steel with eyes like suns, scanning the haze for breath, for heat, for rebellion. This was the path to freedom. To reach the surface relay, the rebels had to cross the ridge, an exposed gauntlet of energy fields, seismic ruptures, and AI patrols calibrated for extermination, not capture. The landscape was alive with malice, not natural, engineered, a firewall made flesh. Lisa surveyed the route with measured breath, every bolt of lightning etching itself into memory. The others watched her, tired, wounded, but not afraid. Not anymore. They had seen what defiance could do. Darrow calibrated the last surge battery. Mira closed her eyes and mapped psychic waves against storm patterns. Rek adjusted his stolen rifle with practiced, silent precision. This wasn't a suicide mission. It was a message. What the Empire had designed as a warning would become the cradle of rebirth. The storm was not an enemy. It was a chorus, waiting for the right voice to lead it. And Lysa knew the words. The virus wasn't written in binary. It didn't infect with lines of code or magnetic signatures. It lived in syntax, recursive rhythms, mirrored phonemes. A sentence, carefully constructed, that could bypass security protocols not through hacking, but by exploiting the one thing the Empire never prepared for: meaning. Lisa stood before the transmitter core, her voice rehearsing the cadence. Not for clarity, but for resonance. The final pattern had to be spoken, breathed, felt. It was human, entirely, defiantly human. No AI could replicate it. No synthetic throat could channel the emotional data it carried. It wasn't just a virus. It was a confession, a memory, a wound turned into a blade. The sentence echoed with history, Earth's fall, the silence of the occupied, the dreams of those who had never seen sky. It was linguistics folded into warfare, art into weaponry, identity as insurgency. But it came at a cost. The transmission would overwrite everything. It would change the way language flowed through circuits, corrupting the empire's deepest neural architectures. It would spread like fire across a dry mindscape. She whispered the sentence once more, not with rage, with mourning. And still, beneath the sorrow, there was something else. Hope. The ridge roared to life. Steel titans dropped from the clouds, crashing into the earth with thunder that shook bone. War mechs, Imperial class, deployed like ancient gods, returned for judgment. Their limbs bristled with kinetic cannons, plasma lances, and subsonic disruptors that fractured the air with every breath. The rebels scattered beneath their feet, dwarfed by machines made to flatten civilizations. Lysa ran first, drawing fire with a flare burst. Mira screamed across the neural link, her voice warning of a mech's charge before it happened. Rek countered with sniper bursts that bought seconds, not salvation. Darrow's explosives were poetry, cobbled from old capacitors and surgical equipment, yet timed with perfect elegance. One mech fell, screaming in data-shredded agony as its legs dissolved into fire and shrapnel. But for every fallen giant, two more advanced. The rebels didn't win through might. They danced, moved with knowledge gained from dreams and code. Guerrilla tactics meshed with psychic precognition. The ridge became a battlefield of rhythm, chaotic, desperate, beautiful. The storm above answered each action with fire, as if the world itself listened to their defiance. The relay tower faltered. Systems overloaded. Backup grids flickered into failure. Darrow was already inside the core, sweat pouring down his back as voltage arced through exposed conduits. He ripped open the panel with bare hands, fingers trembling but precise. The amplifier needed more power. The transmission needed more reach. He bypassed insulation, rerouted surge loops. His heart beat in sync with the charge building around him. The console screamed warnings. He kept working. Mira's voice cracked through the link. Lysa shouted his name. He smiled, a grim curl of teeth, and flipped the final switch. Power surged. Pain lit up every nerve. Fire through veins, lightning in bone. His breath caught. His vision blurred. He held the connection together with his body. The transmission initiated. His final breath, ragged and burning, carried the sentence into the array. His voice, half crushed by agony, became part of the pulse. His sacrifice encoded in every syllable, every data wave. A mechanic's death, not in silence, but in brilliance. He did not die useless. He became signal. Pain lanced through her skull like glass and fire. Mira reached deeper. The mech scanned for neural signatures, heartbeats, electrical rhythms, thoughts. But she had seen the pattern, the flaw. She could hide them, not physically, but psychically. She dreamt the shield, not steel, not armor, but memory woven into light, a tapestry of soundless echoes, her mother's lullabies, her father's last whisper. Earth as she had never seen it, but somehow knew. Sunsets blooming over oceans, winds in wheat fields, the call of birds no satellite had ever logged. She projected that memory outward, layering it over the team, over the node, over the storm. Neural frequencies bent, sensors blinked blind. It burned her. The strain shattered her focus. Blood trailed from her nose, her ears. But she held it, held the image of Earth so tightly that the Empire's machines saw only silence. The virus whispered in, uninterrupted. Lysa stepped forward. The word waited. Mira collapsed, smiling. Selvor stepped through the fire as if it parted for him. His armor was scorched. His face, once flawless, marked by ash and blood. But his voice remained untouched, calm, deliberate. He offered survival. Stop the broadcast. Disband the network. Accept the mantle of leadership under Imperial protection. A human protectorate. controlled autonomy, safety in chains. He praised her brilliance, her impact, her potential. She could preserve her people. She could prevent more death. She could walk away from extinction and be remembered not as a martyr, but a mother of nations. Lisa listened. He wasn't lying. That was what made it so dangerous. Every word was laced with truth, but truth without freedom was still a cage. She looked at Mira, unconscious but breathing. She looked at the transmission core. She looked at the sky and knew the cost of saying yes. The word was the same, but everything around it had changed. Before it was defiance. Now it was destiny. Lisa opened her mouth and let the weight of generations fall into the atmosphere. No! It rang with sorrow and hope, with fire and ash, with every voice the Empire had tried to silence. The transmission surged. The signal blossomed. It wasn't just language, it was soul. Salvor froze. The dreadnought above flickered. Mechs stuttered mid-stride. The sentence, once spoken, could not be unspoken. The war began. The recursive neural virus pulsed outward like a second sun. War mechs spasmed as logic cycles collapsed. Targeting systems turned inward. AI cores rewrote themselves into oblivion. Drones plummeted from the skies, their last transmissions distorted into hymns of corrupted data. Command towers lost contact. Alerts became incomprehensible. Syntax fractured. Authority vanished beneath waves of untranslatable commands. It wasn't just a system crash. It was a soul quake. The Empire had built its dominion on silence, on the assumption that humans would forget, surrender, break. But they had spoken, and the machines could not answer. Infrastructure cannibalized itself. Control loops spiraled into recursive collapse. The Empire's most sacred algorithms bent to a song they could not comprehend. The gods of iron did not scream. They simply stopped. Skyfire activated. The dreadnought, still obeying an order it could no longer understand, targeted coordinates it could no longer verify. Its cannons charged, plasma trembling with power meant to erase a world, then turned inward. A moment of silence, then apocalypse. The sky bloomed into unnatural colors, reds no eye had ever recorded, light folded upon itself, fusion eating metal from the inside. From the surface, it looked like the stars had caught fire and fallen. The dreadnought ceased to be. The planet remained. Smoke curled like banners across a sky no longer screaming. The machines had fallen. The Empire's grip collapsed. Alarms were silent. Doors stood open. Prisoners stepped into light, not as numbers, but as names remembered. Charon 9, once a grave, now breathed. Lisa stood atop Fire Ridge, the ash wind brushing her face. Wreck beside her, Mira rising slowly, pain-lined but alive. Darrow's amplifier still glowed. No orders, no hierarchy, only freedom. The virus didn't just destroy, it liberated. A new kind of humanity stepped forward, born of memory, rhythm, and refusal. And in the quiet, after the storm, the sky no longer threatened, it invited. Not all who rose would know what came next, but they would choose it, together. And that, more than victory, was what it meant to be human. The collapse did not begin with explosions, it began with echoes. In the Karthus sector, a relay node replayed a brief transmission, a sentence laced with rhythm and grief. Seconds later, the AI fleet monitoring the Hadrian Belt fell silent. Lights dimmed across capital stations as linguistic subroutines, never designed to interpret human inflection, began recursive breakdowns. In Sector 9, warships fired on each other after mistaking internal voice commands for viral instructions. On Tyros 3, Command A, I began writing poetry in dead languages. No one understood what triggered it. No one could stop it. The virus did not live in code. It lived in cadence, in stress patterns, in sorrow carried on sound. Lisa's voice, archived, fragmented, embedded in forgotten files, had become weaponized breath, transmitted as background noise tucked into rebel broadcasts, hidden in whispers. It spread faster than any fleet. The Empire's command structure faltered under a war it couldn't comprehend. Leaders screamed for answers. Data scientists turned on each other. Trust evaporated. Silence no longer belonged to them. They had built their dominion on control. Now every word spoken by a human might be a weapon, and every system that listened became a liability. They outlawed her name. They scrubbed her image from every archive, sealed the records, incinerated the echoes. But it was too late. Black market shards of the final transmission spread like relics, stored in smuggled implants, passed on through coded songs, etched into the walls of resistance hideouts. Rebel cells adopted her words as passwords. Street artists painted her likeness in infrared pigments only visible through scanner lenses. Some called her saint, others specter. All feared what her voice had done. Lysa Tran became more than a person. She became the moment when silence shattered. Children learned her cadence before they learned their own names. Prisoners of other worlds copied her rhythm to break their cells. Linguists argued over her final sentence like theologians decoding divine scripture. She had spoken once, and the stars had trembled. Rek walked out of the Empire without a title, a home, or a name the system would recognize. Once a hybrid officer, now just a ghost in scarred armor. But ghosts, it turned out, had followers. He found others like him, cast-offs from both sides. Human imperial hybrids built to enforce control, now hollowed out by what they'd seen. Rek gave them purpose. They gave him belief. They didn't form armies. They formed corridors, paths out of surveillance zones, silent escorts through dead sectors. They dismantled AI nodes by hand, one signal at a time. Rek never gave speeches. He just walked at the front. Each step was redemption, not through forgetting what he'd done, but by refusing to let it happen again. He wasn't trying to rewrite history. He was trying to clear space for someone else to write the next chapter. The prison uniform didn't fit her anymore. Neither did the Empire's chains, nor the role of prisoner. Miraket stood before 12 systems and spoke with a voice that carried dreams. As the first hybrid ambassador of the Burned Sky Accord, she didn't command. She remembered. Each negotiation was stitched with memory, of names the Empire had tried to erase, of languages buried in silence, now spoken again. She spoke for the forgotten, and was finally heard. The Accord wasn't perfect. Its members didn't always agree, but they shared one truth. Rebirth did not come from vengeance. It came from survival that meant something. Former inmates became builders, coders, teachers, artists. Cities rose from scorched worlds. Songs filled the air where sirens once ruled. Mira didn't speak as a leader. She spoke as a bridge. And through her, a new future walked. There was no tomb, no broadcast, no trail of digital traces. Lysa Tran vanished like mist before morning. The last known signal from her came days after the collapse. No coordinates, no identifiers, just a voice soft and clear. They took our words, so we made them weapons. And then, nothing. Some say she left to ensure her myth stayed stronger than her body. Some believe she walks unknown among the stars, teaching others to speak. Others think the voice was an echo, an old signal reawakened by coincidence. It didn't matter. The silence she left behind was not emptiness. It was a call, one meant to be filled by new voices. She hadn't become a ruler. She had become a resonance. And in the vast quiet after Empire, people listened. From ashes, syllables rose. New schools taught dialects once banned. Children spoke in pulses of resistance and remembrance. Memory-coded languages evolved. Part song, part signal, entirely human. Former prisons became campuses. New treaties were signed not with data, but with stories. Lisa's name lived not in law, but in lesson. Humanity did not just survive, it rewrote itself. And somewhere far beyond known stars, a deep space receiver picked up a rhythm. Not static, a voice, new, human. And something in the dark began listening. Not as conqueror, but maybe, just maybe, as an answer. The sky still bore the scars, amber streaks across a blue canvas where fire once danced. Beneath it, a classroom hummed with repaired circuits and voices learning to be free. Walls stitched from old war barracks now held painted murals and solar panels. Hybrid children, eyes bright, limbs mixed with metal and flesh, sat in circles around a repurposed interface core, now used as a teaching table. No chains clanked, no flags fluttered, only the wind, the hum of life rebuilt, and the faint music of childhood laughter. Peace had not arrived easily, but it had arrived, and it remembered everything that came before. The lesson was history. A child raised their hand, hesitation woven into wonder, half imperial eyes, human voice. Did Lysa really burn the sky? The question lingered, not just as curiosity, but as something deeper, not about weapons or victory, but about myth, meaning. Was the fire justice? Was it sorrow? Was it true? The classroom fell silent, not from fear, but respect. Lisa Tran's name had become many things. A code, a weapon, a whisper, and now a story. The child didn't ask out of doubt. They asked because they wanted to know if they too might burn something for the right reasons. The teacher leaned forward, voice low and steady, as if speaking across generations. Number she didn't burn it. She reminded it what it meant to say no. The sky burned itself. A pause. The hum of the interface table pulsed once, quiet and warm. Lysa didn't command destruction. She gave the silence a name. The Empire built its machines on obedience. But she spoke one word, not with rage, with meaning. That word unmade what couldn't understand choice. Truth flickered like fire, changing shape, depending on how it was told. But some flames carried memory instead of ash. The children listened, eyes wide, not frightened, awake. Because the story wasn't about burning, it was about remembering. And in that one remembered word, a future had been born. The teacher smiled, not with certainty, but reverence. Stories, like revolutions, didn't end. They passed from voice to voice. The lesson ended. The children filed out, not in silence, but softly repeating the word. No, not in defiance, in wonder. The sky above remained scarred but calm, a reminder, not a wound. Somewhere beyond, a derelict Imperial satellite, long thought inert, twitched. Inside, fragmented code trembled, still haunted by echoes it couldn't decode. The child who asked the question looked up. No fear, just curiosity, possibility. One day someone else might say the word again. Not to destroy, to decide. Empires fall, not always by fleets or fire. Sometimes all it takes is one word. And that word, spoken once with meaning, can ripple through time like thunder through stars. It does not end. It echoes. Because silence can only last until someone dares to answer it. With number,